He sounded like an angel, but he lived in a nightmare. His voice floated through the radio speakers like sweet smoke. It was high, it was distinct, it was haunting. Women fell in love with a single note. But behind that heavenly sound, a monster waited in the dark. Picture this. It is Detroit in 1956. A crowded house sits on a freezing street. Inside, 10 children smile for the neighbors. They look like a musical miracle. But inside, they live in a war zone. His father was a white man. His mother was a black woman. In those days, the police did not care what happened behind their closed doors. And what happened was terrifying. Gravity pulls hardest. His father used his fists to settle scores. He abused the boy in ways a child should never know. This deep pain birthed a sound that changed R&B music forever. Before the world knew the famous name DeBarge, they knew him as the leader of the group Switch. But the price of his gift was too steep. While his brothers chased dreams in sunny California, he stayed in the cold. He traded his piano for a needle. He traded his future for a high. Here is the deal. How did the most talented member of a legendary family lose it all? The silence was louder than the applause. Detroit is a city built on iron and fire. In the 1950s and 60s, the air tasted like metal. Giant smokestacks lined the river. They puffed thick gray clouds into the sky day and night. The winters were long. They were unforgiving. The wind came off the Detroit River and cut through your coat like a razor blade. Snow did not stay white for long. The soot from the factories turned it black before it could even settle on the ground. It was a hard place to be poor. It was a harder place to be different, and the DeBarge family was very different. Picture a modest house on the east side. It was small. The paint was peeling. The porch sagged under the weight of too many feet. Inside, the rooms were packed tight. 10 children shared the space. They slept 3 or 4 to a bed. They wore hand-me-down clothes. But when they stepped outside, they held their heads high. They had bright eyes and blinding smiles. To the neighbors, they looked like a happy, chaotic circus. But the neighbors did not see what happened when the sun went down. Robert DeBarge Sr. was the king of this castle. He was a white man with a jaw like a block of granite. He had served in the military. He brought the war home with him. He believed in order. He believed in silence. But mostly, he believed in force. He did not hug his children. He inspected them. He looked for flaws. And when he found one, he punished it. Adeline was his wife. She was a black woman with a spirit as soft as a prayer. She loved her babies with a fierce heat. She tried to make that crowded house feel like a home. She cooked large pots of beans and rice. She hemmed their pants. She braided their hair. She tried to fill the cracks in the walls with love. But gravity pulls hardest when the world is against you. The marriage was a battlefield. In those days, a white man with a black wife was a scandal. They had nowhere to fit in. White neighborhoods did not want them. Black neighborhoods looked at them with suspicion. The family was an island. They were cut off from the mainland. This isolation locked them inside with their father, and he was a ticking bomb. The violence was not just a punishment. It was a language. Robert Sr. used his fists to talk. A spilled glass of milk was a crime. A loud laugh was an insult. The children learned to read the air. They knew the sound of his car engine. They knew the heavy thud of his boots on the porch steps. When he walked in, the house held its breath. The joy evaporated. Bobby was the oldest boy. He saw everything. He felt everything. He watched his father strike his mother. He saw Adeline fall. He saw the blood. He heard the screams that pierced the thin walls. He wanted to jump in front of her. He wanted to be the hero, but he was small. His father was a giant. The fear paralyzed him. It froze his feet to the floor. So Adeline did the only thing she could do. She ran to the phone. She dialed the operator. She begged the police to come. She told them a man was hurting her family. She told them she was afraid for her life. But here is the deal. The police cars would roll up to the curb. The lights would flash red and blue against the gray snow. The officers would walk up the steps, but they did not see a crime. They saw a white man in his own home. They saw a black woman who was out of place. The racism of the era was a thick wall. The officers would slap Robert Sr. on the back. They would share a laugh. They would tell him to keep his property under control. Then they would turn around and leave. The door would close, the lock would click, and the family was alone with the monster again. The silence that followed was louder than the sirens. This betrayal broke something inside Bobby. He learned that the law would not save him. He learned that the world did not care about his pain. He realized they were on their own. So he built a new world. There was a piano in the house. It was old. Some of the keys were chipped. It was not much to look at. But for Bobby, it was a spaceship. It was the only vehicle that could take him away from Detroit. When the shouting started, he sat at the bench. He pressed his fingers into the keys. He did not just play notes. He poured his terror into the instrument. He took the sound of his mother's crying and turned it into a melody. He took the sound of his father's yelling and turned it into a rhythm. He opened his mouth to sing. His voice was a surprise. It was not low and angry like his father's. It was high. It was delicate. It was a falsetto that floated above the roof, above the smokestacks, above the black snow. It was the sound of an angel trying to escape hell. He called his brothers and sisters. "Come here," he said. "Sing this note. Harmonize with me." Tommy, Bunny, Randy, Marty. They gathered around the piano. They were hungry. They were scared. They were bruised. But when they opened their mouths, they were powerful. Their voices blended in a way that only family can. The vibration hummed in their chests. It drowned out the fear. For 3 minutes at a time, they were not victims. They were stars. Bobby pushed him hard. He was a perfectionist. He demanded they get it right. He was channeling the discipline of his father, but he was using it for survival. He told them that music was their ticket out. He promised them that one day they would leave the cold behind. He promised them sunny days and big houses. He promised them safety. But promises made in the dark have a steep price. The trauma of that house did not disappear just because they sang a pretty song. It went deep. It buried itself in their bones. Bobby learned to perform through the pain. He learned to smile when he wanted to scream. He learned to split himself in two. There was the Bobby on stage, glowing and perfect. And there was the Bobby inside, shivering in the cold. This ability to hide the truth was his greatest skill. It made him a magnetic performer. It made him a leader, but it also left a hole in his soul, a hole that was shaped like a needle. As the music got louder, the shadows got longer. The very thing that saved them was preparing to eat them alive. The escape route was paved with gold, but it led straight off a cliff. California did not look like Detroit. The sun was brighter here. The air smelled like jasmine and ocean salt, not factory smoke. For Bobby and his bandmates, it felt like landing on a different planet. They had escaped the gray winters. They had escaped the shouting. Now, they stood at the gates of a kingdom. The year was 1978. Disco was dying. The world was hungry for something new. They wanted soul. They wanted rhythm. They wanted real musicians who could play instruments and sing until the windows rattled. Bobby DeBarge was ready. He had a demo tape in his hand. This small plastic cassette held his dreams. It found its way to Jermaine Jackson. Jermaine was royalty. He was a member of the Jackson 5. He was the son-in-law of Berry Gordy, the man who built Motown. Jermaine pressed play. Picture the scene. Jermaine sat in a plush office in Los Angeles. The tape began to spin. A voice poured out of the speakers. It was high. It was fluid. It sounded like a flute made of human flesh. Jermaine stopped the tape. He played it again. He knew instantly. He was listening to gold. He signed the group immediately. They called themselves Switch. Here is the deal. Motown was the factory of stars. They polished rough stones into diamonds. But Bobby did not need much polishing. He was already shining. He stepped into the recording booth. He sat at the keyboard. He closed his eyes. The song was They'll Never Be. When this song hit the radio, it did not just play. It exploded. It climbed the R&B charts like a rocket. It reached the top 10. It sold over 1 million copies. A gold record hung on the wall. For a boy who grew up sleeping 3 to a bed, this was unimaginable. Suddenly, the world knew his name. Switch became the kings of the late 70s. They appeared on Soul Train. The curtain would open. The lights would flash off their sequined shirts. The crowd would lose their minds. Women in the front row screamed until they fainted. They reached out just to touch the hem of Bobby's pants. He was a sex symbol. He was a star. The money followed the fame. The checks arrived in the mail. They had commas and zeros that made his head spin. Picture the transformation. In Detroit, they worried about the heat getting turned off. In Hollywood, they worried about which color Mercedes to drive. Bobby bought furs. He bought jewelry that weighed down his neck. He wore white suits that stayed perfectly clean. He looked like a prince. But the best purchase did not have wheels or diamonds. Bobby took that Motown money and he sent it home. He bought a house for Adeline. He moved his mother out of the crushing poverty of the East Side. He moved her to Grand Rapids. He gave her walls that did not scream. He gave her a kitchen where the food never ran out. He was the hero. He had fulfilled the promise he made at the old chipped piano. Gravity seemed to disappear. Bobby was flying high. He was the most talented man in the room. Musicians studied him. They tried to copy his falsetto. They tried to copy the way he bounced on the piano bench, but they could not do it. He had a secret ingredient. His pain gave his voice a texture that no one else had. When he sang a ballad like I Call Your Name, you believed him. You felt the heartbreak. He opened the door for his family. Bobby was not selfish with his gift. He knew his younger brothers were back home, watching him. He brought them out to California. He brought Elle. He brought Chico. He showed them the ropes. He sat Elle down at the keyboard. He showed him how to shape a melody. He showed him how to produce a track. He was the architect of the family sound. Without Bobby, there is no Elle DeBarge. Without Bobby, there is no rhythm of the night. He was the source. He was the well that everyone drank from. The industry loved them. They were called the Black Kennedys. They were beautiful. They were talented. They represented a new kind of Black excellence. They crossed over. White audiences loved them. Black audiences adored them. They broke down barriers just by walking into a room. For a moment, it was perfect. The champagne flowed. The flashbulbs popped. The applause was a constant roar. Bobby stood at the center of it all. He had beaten the odds. He had beaten his father. He was the king of the hill. But wait, there is a saying in the music business: the higher the high, the lower the low. Success is a powerful drug, but it is not a cure. The applause felt good, but it faded when the lights went down. The money was great, but it could not buy peace of mind. The memories of Detroit were still there. They lived in the back of his head. The voice of his father was still whispering in his ear. Bobby needed a way to silence the noise. He needed a way to keep the energy up. The schedule was brutal. Tour buses, hotel rooms, studio sessions. Sleep was a luxury he could not afford. Someone offered him a pick-me-up, just a little white powder. It would help him stay awake. It would help him perform. It was innocent at first. It was just part of the rock and roll lifestyle. Everyone was doing it. So he took it. And for a moment, the pain stopped. The energy returned. He felt invincible. But shadows are longest when the sun is brightest. While the world saw a smile, the darkness was growing. The monster he left in Detroit had followed him to California. It did not look like his father anymore. Now, it looked like a tiny bag of powder, and it was hungry. The fall was coming, and it would be just as spectacular as the rise. Cocaine is a liar. It tells you that you are a king. It tells you that you can dance forever. It tells you that the party will never end. Bobby DeBarge believed the lie. At first, the drug was a friend. It helped him forget the cold winters in Detroit. It helped him forget the sound of his father's fists. It kept the energy high during long nights in the studio. But a friend does not steal your soul. A friend does not empty your bank account. Here is the deal. The addiction took the steering wheel. Bobby was just a passenger in his own life. The discipline he learned from his father vanished. He started showing up late to rehearsals. Sometimes he did not show up at all. His temper became short. He snapped at the people who loved him. The paranoia set in. He thought everyone was against him. The first casualty was his career. Picture the band Switch. They were a machine. They relied on precision, but their leader was falling apart. The other members grew tired of the chaos. They grew tired of waiting. Tension filled the dressing rooms. The brotherhood began to crack. Motown saw the writing on the wall. The executives were businessmen. They did not have time for a spiraling star. They looked at the DeBarge family. They saw fresh faces. They saw Elle. They saw Bunny. They saw a group that was hungry and clean. Gravity pulls hardest on the one at the top. Bobby left Switch. He went solo. He thought his name alone was enough. He released a solo album called It's Not Over, but the title was a lie. It was over. The album did not sell. The radio stations did not play it. The fans were confused. Without the machine behind him, Bobby was drifting. He watched from the sidelines as his brothers and sister exploded. The group DeBarge became the new sensation. All This Love, Time Will Reveal, Rhythm of the Night. These songs were everywhere. They were on every station. They were in every car. It was a bitter pill to swallow. Bobby had taught them everything. He taught Elle how to play the keys. He taught them how to harmonize. He was the architect of their sound. Now, they were living in the mansion he designed, and he was locked outside the gate. He was proud, yes, but he was also jealous. He was hurting, and when Bobby hurt, he used more drugs. The money dried up, the royalties stopped coming, but the habit remained, and the habit was expensive. Desperation is a dangerous guide. When the music money was gone, Bobby turned to the streets. He needed cash to feed the monster. He went back to the only other life he knew. He fell in with the wrong crowd. He started moving weight. He was not just using anymore. He was part of the trade. It was a long way down from Soul Train. Picture Grand Rapids in 1988. The gray sky hung low over the city. The police had been watching. They had been listening. They knew what was happening. They moved in. The raid was swift. There were no flashing lights from a stage this time. There were only the flashing lights of police cruisers. Men with badges and guns surrounded him. They put him in handcuffs. The cold steel clicked around his wrists. It was the same sound he heard as a child when the police came for his father. But this time, they were taking him away. The charge was drug trafficking. The evidence was solid. Bobby stood before a judge. He was 32 years old. He looked older. The bright eyes that once charmed millions were dim. The face that women adored was gaunt. He wore a suit, but it did not hide the truth. He was broken. The gavel came down. The sound echoed like a gunshot. 5 years. He was sent to a prison in Wisconsin. Strip away the fame. Strip away the sequins. Strip away the falsetto. What is left? Just a man in a cage. Prison is a loud place, but for Bobby, it was silent. There was no piano. There was no applause. There were only concrete walls and regret. He had time to think. He thought about the abuse. He thought about the fear. He realized that he had run all the way to California, but he never really escaped Detroit. The trauma had followed him. It had waited for him, and now it had trapped him. But wait, it gets worse. While he sat in that cell, his body began to fail. He started to lose weight. He could not keep food down. A fever burned in his blood. He felt weak. This was not just withdrawal. This was something else. This was a new monster. In the early 90s, there was a plague sweeping through the world. It was a silent killer. People whispered its name. They were afraid to say it out loud. HIV. Bobby received the diagnosis behind bars. It was a death sentence. There were no cocktails of medicine back then. There was only fear. He was alone. He was sick. He was a million miles from the spotlight. The irony was cruel. He had survived the beatings from his father. He had survived the brutal streets of Detroit. He had survived the cutthroat music industry. But he could not survive this. He kept it a secret. He did not want the world to know. He did not want pity. He wanted to be remembered as the angel, not the victim. He served his time. He watched the calendar pages turn. He counted the days until freedom. But he knew that even if he walked out of those gates, he was not really free. The virus was a prison he could not leave. When he was finally released, the world had moved on. Music had changed. The falsetto era was fading. Hip-hop was taking over. He came out of prison in 1993. He was a shell of the man who sang "They'll Never Be." His clothes hung loose on his frame. His skin was pale. His eyes were deep pools of sadness. He tried to make music again. He went into the studio. He wanted one last hit. He wanted to prove that he still had it. He sat at the keyboard. His fingers touched the keys. But the magic was tired. His voice was still there, but it was thinner. It lacked the power it once had. It was the sound of a ghost trying to sing. The tragedy of Bobby DeBarge is not that he fell, it is that he fell so far, so fast, and he fell alone. The crowd that cheered for him did not see the pain. They only saw the performance. And now, the final curtain was getting ready to drop. The year was 1995. The disco lights were long gone. The white suits were distant memories. Bobby DeBarge lay in a hospice bed in Grand Rapids, Michigan. The room did not smell like expensive cologne or stage smoke. It smelled like antiseptic and silence. He was 39 years old. He should have been in his prime. He should have been touring the world. Instead, he weighed less than 100 pounds. The virus had stripped him of everything. It took his muscle. It took his energy. It took his future. Here is the hard truth. When a star falls, the world watches with a mix of pity and judgment. The newspapers printed the headlines. They called him a troubled genius. They listed his crimes. They mentioned the drug trafficking charge. They mentioned the prison time in Wisconsin. They painted a picture of a man who threw his life away. But the papers missed the real story. They did not write about the terrified little boy in Detroit. They did not write about the father who beat the music out of him. They did not write about the deep pain that fueled the falsetto. They saw the addict. They did not see the survivor. On August 16th, the struggle ended. Bobby took his last breath. The angel finally left the hell he had lived in for so long. Picture the reaction. Radio stations across America broke the news. DJs played There'll Never Be and I Call Your Name. For a few days, his voice floated through the airwaves again. People remembered where they were when they first heard Switch. They remembered the high notes. They remembered the joy. But the tribute was short. The music business is a cruel machine. It mourns for a moment, and then it moves on to the next big thing. The records stopped spinning. The magazines printed the next issue. The silence returned. But wait, you cannot bury a sound like that. Gravity pulls bodies into the ground, but music has wings. In the years that followed, a strange thing happened. Bobby was gone, but his voice got louder. A new generation of artists discovered his records in crates and basements. They were not just R&B singers. They were rappers. They were the new kings of the charts. The notorious B, I, G. Listen to the DeBarge sound. He heard the smooth rhythm of Stay With Me. He took that sound, he slowed it down, he turned it into a massive hit called One More Chance. Tupac Shakur heard the pain in the music. He understood the struggle. He used the DeBarge melody for his song, I Ain't Mad at Cha. Here is the deal. The hip-hop community understood something the critics missed. They heard the sorrow behind the sweetness. They respected the hustle. They resurrected Bobby DeBarge. They took his falsetto and wove it into the fabric of modern music. Suddenly, Bobby was everywhere again. He was in the clubs. He was in the cars. Kids who were not even born when Switch was famous were nodding their heads to his melodies. He became a ghost in the machine. He was more present in death than he had been in his final years of life. But for the family, the aftermath was heavy. His brothers and sister had to carry the weight. El DeBarge carried the torch. He had the voice. He had the talent. But he also battled the same demons. The same shadow that swallowed Bobby tried to swallow El. The story of the DeBarge family became a cautionary tale. It showed the world that talent is not enough to save you from trauma. The price of fame was high. Bobby paid it with his life. He gave the world a sound that was pure gold. But in exchange, he lived a life of lead. So, how do we remember him? Do we remember the mugshot? Do we remember the prison cell? Or do we remember the music? Listen closely to I Call Your Name one more time. Hear the way his voice cracks just a little. That is not just technique. That is a cry for help. That is the sound of a man trying to sing his way out of the dark. He never made it out. But he left the door open for everyone else. And that is a legacy that never dies. The fist could hurt him. The needle could break him. But the falsetto lives forever. On August 16th, 1995, the music stopped in Grand Rapids. The hospital room was quiet. Bobby DeBarge took his final breath. He was only 39 years old. The newspapers wrote their headlines. They called him a troubled soul. They listed his mistakes. They talked about the prison cell and the addiction. They tried to close the book on his life. But here is the deal. You can bury a man. You cannot bury a sound. Gravity pulls a body into the earth. But a melody has wings. Just when the world thought Bobby was gone, he came back. He did not come back on a stage. He came back through the speakers of a new generation. The kings of hip-hop dug through the crates. The notorious B.I.G. heard that sweet, high voice. He felt the rhythm. He took the sound of DeBarge and turned it into one more chance. Tupac Shakur heard the sorrow in the notes. He used that feeling for his own hits. Suddenly, Bobby was everywhere again. He was in the Jeeps in Brooklyn. He was in the lowriders in Los Angeles. Kids who never saw Switch perform were nodding their heads to his ghost. This is the true legacy. The DeBarge family gave us more than just songs. They showed us the cost of brilliance. L. DeBarge carried the torch after Bobby passed. He fought the same demons. He walked the same tightrope. Their story is a lesson. It teaches us that talent is a gift, but it is not a shield. Picture the man one last time. Forget the mugshot. Forget the hospital bed. Remember the piano. Remember the way his voice floated like smoke. He took the ugly parts of his life and made them beautiful. He took the pain of his father's fist and turned it into a falsetto that will never die. The monster in the dark did not win. The music won. Some stories end without closure, but dignity doesn't need applause. What is your favorite memory of this musical family? Do you remember where you were when you first heard that high note? Scroll down and share your story in the comments. We read every single one.